My name is Paul Roberts, and I'm the author events guy at Shaman Drum Bookshop. I want to thank you all for coming out this evening. And, my very big show. I just wanted to say a few words as long as I have a captive audience. The first thing I wanted to say is to thank everyone for coming. And for those of you standing in the hallway, I do wish we had more floor space and more chairs.
Can I sit here?
Possible for people to squeeze in down the aisles and be at the ends of aisles. I don't know.
Can I sit on the stage?
This side. And if people want to sit on the foot of the stage too. That
you can
sounds
sit
perfect.
anywhere on the stage.
Yeah, we have a lot of space up here that we're certainly not using.
What? Story hour, right? Can you hear me in the back? Can you hear me on the stairs? No? Can you hear me in the other room? Can you hear me? No. There's more room on stage. There's at least room for 5 more on stage, and we have a seat if there's anybody pregnant out there. I have had such an odd day in Ann Arbor. And I'm leaving right after here to probably go have an odd day in Minneapolis. And then I'm going home to get right back into my odd life. So let's see, I got here and I did a couple of interviews right away. Then I was starving to death, so I went back to the hotel to get some room service, and it turned out there was no lunchtime room service. So then somebody was dispatched to go get me a sandwich and some milk, and they showed up with a half-gallon of milk and I thought, do you know how depressing it is to have a half-gallon of milk in your hotel room when there's no refrigeration? It's just, it makes you look like you're doing poorly besides just doing poorly. I'm so tired. I got up very early this morning from wherever I was. I'm convinced I was in Atlanta yesterday, but I know I wasn't. Although I'm telling people I was, and I was convinced all day of it, and I love Atlanta, so I was glad to be there. And so then after the half-gallon of milk came, and I could see that everything was falling apart, there was no plate for the sandwich, and I don't want to tell you what kind it was, but it was just drippy and disgusting. And there was no plate. And then I realized 95% of the world would kill to have this kind of problem, right? That there's no plate for a huge drippy sandwich and a half-gallon of milk. So I stopped complaining, and then I was supposed to do an interview with the Utne reader at 3:30 or something like that. So I thought, I'll just close my eyes for a moment. And I woke up at 5:15. And I called the person at the Utne Reader who's in Minneapolis, and she said that she had gotten her kitchen so clean. And I thought, well, that's a blessing in disguise then. Although I missed our interview by 2 hours, so then she'd been promised a 45-minute interview, and so we read until after 6. I mean, we talked until after 6. And of course, then I couldn't really order the room service dinner, but I'd had the big drippy sandwich, and I still had all this milk, so I actually brought my milk. But of course, there's no cups here except for these kind of V-shaped, these snow cone cups, you know. So I drank some milk out of a snow cone cup, and I ate one of Sam's protein bars, which we travel with, because he just falls apart if he gets too hungry. So, and of course, if they've been in your purse for any length of time, they don't look like anything else. They look shapeless and matted. They're very flat after that. So, but I'm not actually hungry. I just want to tell you what an odd day I'm having here in Ann Arbor. So, and I want to tell you also that I have discovered how much I hate signing books. I hate personalizing books. I hate it. I have hated it for like 15 years. And I have dutifully signed and personalized 1 trillion books. I mean, 1 trillion books. And I hate it. And usually if I talk for an hour or an hour and a half, and you have a couple hundred people or a few hundred people, I mean, everyone should have such problems, but it's another hour and a half. And sometimes it's 2 more hours. And I get to the airports going like that, and I hate it. And I'm only pretending to feel warm and friendly when you're explaining how to spell your name. And I'm in a bad mood when you're explaining how to spell your name. So, this is the new me. I was in Chico 2 weeks ago, or 10 days ago, and it's a 3-hour drive each way, and I was leaving the next morning to go somewhere, and I had to drive the 3 hours back, and it was storming, and that was the first night of this career. I'll be 45 next week, and I have been doing this for next month, for a very long time. And for the first time I said, I'm going to sign my name and put a little heart next to it for you in lieu of your name. And I'll put the date if you want it. The date is like the extra. And I was out of there in about 40 minutes. I probably signed 200 books, and I was out of there in 40 minutes and back on the road. And I love signing my name. I love that so much more than personalizing books. And so I've decided this is the new me. And I've always thought the people that wouldn't personalize books were prima donnas. But I think they're just tired, and they don't want you to spell your name for them. And I'm such an old black belt codependent that I just want everyone to be happy and to think that if you like me, it'll change how I feel about me. You know what? And I am tired of fobbing that off on anyone. And this is the new me. So it's a third night. Thank you. So I've been having this great time in the Midwest, although I never know what town I'm actually in, but I don't overthink it. And I'm somewhere, right? And that's good. That's a start. And I've been just signing my name and often usually putting a little heart there and mostly the date. And then sometimes people walk away and go, I didn't get a heart. And I go, it was an oversight. And I mean that. And then I give them their heart. And I mean the heart because now I love them because I don't have to personalize their book. So I've done this a number of nights now. It's probably the third or fourth. It might be the fourth time. So I just want to warn you in advance. I have to leave for the airport probably about 9:15, and I'll sign however many copies you have. Backlist, I don't care if you bought it at Amazon, and I can tell that, then you need to buy a book from them. And then I wish you could buy any book from them, but they're only selling my book. So you have to actually buy one of my books, but you should spend the same amount of money as you spend at Amazon. And if you're buying a lot of your books at Amazon, I can promise you, you are going to get nowhere as good a seat in heaven. This is just true. You're going to get and you have to do what's right for you, and it just happens to be the truth, right, Chuck? Right. From a theological point of view, if it's hurting everybody. It's hurting everybody. It's really fun. It's adrenalizing, and it's not good for the world. It's bad for the world, and you may need to do it, and that's okay. But I'm thinking that I can't sign your book unless you agree. They brought me here. They shelled out something and have gone to enormous inconvenience and hassle to get this whole thing in place, so you need to buy a book from them. It's just really simple. So do that, or hide your Amazon receipt. People will come to bookstores and they won't even hide their Amazon receipts, And I feel like, don't you have any shame, that you come to an independent bookstore and you let me see your Amazon receipt? So anyway, I think that's all the business I have to take care of. The independent. Yeah. Yes. Yes, you can do that. You can do anything you want. As long as you don't try to get me to sign an Amazon book without paying something to the bookstore here, and as long as you don't try to get me to personalize your book. I don't even know what I'm doing right now, what I'm reading. I think I'll read this. I like this piece right now. Then I'll answer some questions, and then we'll figure it all out as we go along. This is. See, I wore this sweater that I look fabulous in, and then this kind of slightly dirty T-shirt, thinking that I'd have this fabulous sweater and this very expensive silk scarf that was my friend Pammy's. Actually, I could put this on and it will dress up the outfit and not make me overheat, and it will cover up the wire. Uh-oh, but now maybe the people on this, can you hear me even with this? Okay, it doesn't, okay. Okay, now I look better. And I refuse to hold in my stomach. Things are really falling apart, or not. I'm not sure, but usually this sweater's big and you don't have to worry about it. But I'm just not going to. As a political act of radicalism, I can no longer hold in my stomach. Okay, this is a piece on grief that I wrote really quite a while ago, but that it's there's a very, very long kind of overarching essay called Lily Pads. That's a description of the places I landed on my faith journey before I came to St. Andrew Presbyterian, which is where I know Chuck Booker Hirsch from, where he was our intern for a long time. And the rest of the pieces were mostly written at Salon, which is an internet and online magazine that's every 2 weeks. I mean, I'm every 2 weeks on Thursdays. And I wrote about 50 pieces over a couple years that were mostly about faith, but with the intention of compiling them, and then picked 20-something of them. But then this other piece, Ladders, is the really only old piece, but it's one of my favorite things I ever wrote, so I shoehorned it in, and plus it's really about some of the most basic things about faith that I understand. That the more you're willing to do your grief and the more you're willing to do your rage, probably the deeper it's going to take you into your sense of faith, because the deeper it's going to give you yourself back. So that's what this is about, called Ladders. I'm going to need some water, though, too. I hate to say this. I don't know how we'll do it. We'll get one of those Dutch fire things going where you, water for everyone. I'm not going on till everyone's got water. Or milk, yeah. Okay. They only have these funny little snow cone cups. I hear water. Now I have to go to the bathroom. Just kidding. Here comes the water. We lost the mic.
No.
Yeah. Oh, you can? Okay. And water's coming up. Is it in one of the snow cone cups?
In a pitcher, actually.
Oh, okay. Oh my God! Look at this. Here. And a glass. Look at this. Wow, thank you. Is this pretty standard for Ann Arbor? Yeah. It's not bottled. Oh, I don't care. If you could see how I eat, you would know I don't care whether it's bottled. Oh, and so good. No, it's actually really good water. Okay. In May of 1992, I went to Ixtapa with Sam, who was then 2.5. At the time, Pammy had been battling breast cancer for 2 years. I also had a boyfriend with whom I spoke 2 or 3 times a day, whom I loved and who loved me. Then in early November of that year, the big eraser came down and got Pammy, and it also got the boyfriend from whom I parted by mutual agreement. The grief was huge, monolithic. All those years I fell for the great palace lie that grief should be gotten over as quickly as possible and as privately. But what I've discovered since is that the lifelong fear of grief keeps us in a barren, isolated place, and that only grieving can help heal grief. The passage of time will lessen the acuteness, but time alone, without the direct experience of grief, will not heal it. San Francisco is a city in grief. We are a world in grief, and it is at once intolerable and a great opportunity. I'm pretty sure that it is only by experiencing that ocean of sadness in a naked and immediate way that we come to be healed, which is to say that we come to experience life with a real sense of presence and spaciousness and peace. I began to learn this when Sam and I went back to the same resort 3 months after Pammy's death. I took him back partly for reasons of punctuation. He was different this time, though. We both were. I had discovered that I could just barely live without Pammy. Every time I went back to her house to visit her daughter, Rebecca, I heard Pammy's flute, remembered exactly the yellow of her hair, felt stalked by her presence, noted by it. It was like the hot yellow day that Faulkner describes in Light in August as a prone and somnolent yellow cat contemplating the narrator. At any moment, the cat might suddenly spring. Also, I was a little angry with men at the time and scared. In the aftermath of the romantic loss, my heart felt like it had a fence surrounding it. Now Sam seemed to be standing with me behind this fence. He seemed to feel safe only around me. He was sweet and friendly but shyer, no longer the social butterfly he had been the year before when Pammy had still been alive. Back then, I could leave him all day in the resort's child care program. This time, he was clingy and heavily Oedipal. I began to call myself Jocasta. He began to call me darling. The first year I'd come here alone with Sam. I swam and ate by myself most of the time, walking into the dining area 3 times a day, feeling shy and odd, cringing, with my arms stiffly at my side like Pee Wee Herman. But this year, I was with my friend Tom, an extremely funny Jesuit and sober alcoholic who drank like a rat for years and smoked a little non-habit-forming marijuana on a daily basis. He also did amyl nitrate, although he adds that this was just to get to know people. His best friend Pat was along too. I found that I could hardly stand for people to have best friends who were still alive. But when Sam and I had breakfast with both of them at the airport the morning we left, they made me laugh and forget myself. Pat is a very pretty woman in her late 40s who is about 100 pounds overweight and sober 7 years. Pat has a lot of problems, Tom told us over breakfast. This is true, said Pat. She was sober for 4 years, he continued, until her husband got brain cancer. Then for a few years, she had a little social Tylenol with codeine every day, with just the merest slug of NyQuil every night for a cold that just wouldn't go away. I was a little depressed, she said. After breakfast, we flew to Ixtapa. Adobe haciendas, cobblestone paths, a long white beach, palm trees, bougainvillea, warm ocean water, and no one back home desperately hoping I'd call. Grief, as I read somewhere once, is a lazy Susan. One day it is heavy and underwater, and the next day it spins and stops at loud and rageful, and the next day at wounded keening, and the next day numbness, silence. I was hoarse for the first 6 weeks after Pammy died and my romance ended, from shouting in the car and crying, and I had blisters on the palm of one hand from hitting the bed with my tennis racket, bellowing in pain and anger. But on the first morning in Mexico, the lazy Susan stopped at feelings of homesickness, like when my parents sold the house where I grew up. I woke before Sam and lay in my bed in the cool, white adobe room, filled with memories of my first day here the year before. I remembered calling Pammy and my lover that first morning, how they gasped with pleasure to hear my voice. I lay there thinking this time that I had made a dreadful mistake to return, that I was not ready to laugh or play or even relax, and I wondered whether or not God had yet another rabbit he or she could pull out of the hat. Then my Oedipal little son woke up and hopped over to my bed. He patted my face for a while and then said tenderly, "You're a beautiful girl." The year before, when I dropped him off at the thatched child care unit, we'd walk holding hands, and on the way, he'd cry out joyfully, "Hi, Sky, my name is Sam. I yike you," because he couldn't say his L's. "Hi, Yeef," he'd say happily to the leaves. "My name is Sam. I yike you." It seemed very long ago. This year he looked at me all the time like a mournful fiancé, and he said, "I want to kiss you on the yips." On the third day in Mexico, Tom told me that Jung, sometime after his beloved wife died, said, "It cost me a great deal to regain my footing. Now I am free to become who I truly am." And this is God's own truth. The more often I cried in my room in Ixtapa and felt just generally wretched, the more often I started to have occasional moments of utter joy, of feeling aware of each moment shining for its own momentous sake. I am no longer convinced that you're supposed to get over the death of certain people, but little by little, pale and swollen around the eyes, I began to feel a sense of reception, that I was beginning to receive the fact of Pammy's death, the finality. I let it enter me. I was terribly erratic, feeling so holy and serene some moments that I was sure I was going to end up dating the Dalai Lama. Then the grief and craziness would hit again, and I would be in broken mind, back in the howl. The depth of the feeling continued to surprise and threaten me, but each time it hit again and I bore it like a nicotine craving, I would discover that it hadn't washed me away. After a while, it was like an inside shower, washing off some of the rust and calcification in my pipes. It was like giving a dry garden a good watering. Don't get me wrong, grief sucks, it really does. Unfortunately, though, avoiding it robs us of life, of the now, of a sense of living spirit. Mostly I've tried to avoid it by staying very busy, working too hard, trying to achieve as much as possible. You can often avoid the pain by trying to fix other people. Shopping helps in a pinch, as does romantic obsession. Martyrdom can't be beat. While too much exercise works for many people, it doesn't for me. But I have found that a stack of magazines can be numbing and even mood-altering. But the bad news is that whatever you use to keep the pain at bay robs you of the flecks and nuggets of gold that feeling grief will give you. A fixation can keep you nicely defined and give you the illusion that your life has not fallen apart. But since your life may indeed have fallen apart, the illusion won't hold up forever. And if you are lucky and brave, you will be willing to bear disillusion. You begin to cry and writhe and yell, and then to keep on crying. And then, finally, grief ends up giving you the two best things, softness and illumination. Every afternoon when I'd pick Sam up at the kids' club, it was as if he'd spent the day in a workshop on surviving the loss of your mother. When I'd appear Lazarus-like to take him back to our room, his joy was huge. We always stopped to watch the iguanas who gathered on the grass near the lagoon, the giant adults like something out of Jurassic Park, the babies from Dr. Seuss. They were so wonderfully absurd and antediluvian that it was like communion between you and them and something ancient. We spent a lot of time in our room, too. It was air-conditioned. Sam, so solemn and watchful, frequently brought up the last time he had seen Pammy on Halloween, 3 days before she died. He was dressed up as a sea monster, and he sat on her bed, and they sang Frere Jacques together. He went over and over the facts of the evening. She was in her jammies? Yes. I was in my sea monster costume? That's right. I thought a lot about the effect of Pammy's death on Sam, my own stunned attempts to deal with that, the worry that he voiced every few days that if Rebecca's mother could die, then wasn't it possible that his could too? I somehow felt that all I had to offer was my own willingness to feel bad. I figured that eventually the plates of the earth would shift inside me and I would feel a lessening of the pain. Trying to fix him or distract him or jolly him out of his depression would actually be a disservice. I prayed for the willingness to let him feel sad and displaced until he was able to stop slogging through the confusion and step back into the river of ordinariness. The sun beat down. The hours passed slowly to the drone of the air conditioner. I kept starting to cry and then falling asleep. Sometimes grief looks like narcolepsy. One afternoon in our room, I had been crying a little while Sam dozed in his own bed. Then I fell deeply asleep. I woke much later to find Sam standing by my bed, tugging at my sleeve, looking at me earnestly with his huge, googly, extraterrestrial eyes. He cleared his throat and then said something I guess he must have heard on TV. He said, "Excuse me, mister." It made my heart hurt. I thought I was going to die. In Song of Myself, Whitman wrote, "Sometimes touching another person is more than I can bear." There was a man here this week with just one leg. I'd seen his prosthetic leg lying around by the pool a few times before I actually saw him. And when I did, he was climbing up a trapeze ladder in the circus grounds. Circus school was held every afternoon at 3 on the lawn between the haciendas and the beach, using an elaborate rig of ropes and swings and netting. The man was wearing shorts, and his stump was visible an inch or two below the hemline. And I've got to say that this kicked the shit out of my feeling self-conscious in shorts because of my cellulite and stretch marks. He climbed the ladder with disjointed grace, asymmetrical but not clumsy, rung by rung, focused and steady and slow. Then he reached the platform, put on his safety harness, and swung out over the safety net, his one leg hooked over the bar of the trapeze, swinging back and forth and finally letting go. A teacher on the other trapeze swung toward him, and they caught each other's hands and held on, and they swung back and forth for a while. Then he dropped on his back to the safety net and raised his fist in victory. "Yes," he said, and lay there on the net for a long time, looking at the sky with a secret smile. I approached him shyly at lunch the next day and said, "You were great on the trapeze. Are you going to do it again?" And I had this idea that he might, so that I could do some serious writing about spirit and guts and triumph. But all he said was, "Honey, I got much bigger mountains to climb." Life does not seem to present itself to me for my convenience, to box itself up nicely so I can write about it with wisdom and a point to make before putting it on a shelf somewhere. Now in my early 40s, I understand just enough about life to understand that I do not understand much of anything. You show me a man with one leg climbing up a trapeze ladder, and the best I can do is to tell you that when I saw him, he was very focused and in a good mood. The next day I saw his plastic leg lying on a beach towel at the far end of the beach where the windsurfing lessons take place. Oh dear, I thought. The shoelace of the expensive sneaker on the foot of the plastic leg was untied. I went and tied it and then sat down in the sand. I really wanted to ask how he lost his leg and how he got back on his feet when one was now made of plastic. I remembered how, a few months before Pammy died, we read a line by the great Persian mystical poet Rumi, "Where there is ruin, there is hope for a treasure." Pammy and I talked at the time of a sunken ship on the bottom of the ocean, full of jewels and gold. It was there in the heightened sense of existence and of the sacred that we felt in the midst of the devastation of her illness. It was there in the incredible sense of immediacy and joy we had felt some days toward the end, cruising malls and parks. Pammy in her wheelchair, wearing a wig, lashing me with a blue silken scarf to go faster. I sat on the beach hoping to see the man again, thinking of how much we lose, yet how much remains. But it was getting late, and I needed to go pick up Sam. And I left before the man with one leg returned. My new friend Pat had gone snorkeling almost every afternoon and loved it more than any other activity, although because of her weight it was impossible for her to climb back into the boat unaided. On the day before we left Mexico, I decided to give it a try. The snorkel boat left at 3 every day and took a group of people across the bay to a cove 20 minutes away. Over lunch, though, I started to chicken out until Pat said I had to go, that we couldn't be friends if I didn't go. Then tell me what you loved most about it, I said. She thought for a while, and then a faraway, almost sensuous look came over her face. I like picking out the guys who are going to help push my big, wet, slippery body back up the ladder, she said. Tom and I ended up going together. The little cove was near a beach with grass huts and umbrellas on the white sands. Cactuses on ancient neighboring hills framed it all. We donned our gear and jumped in. The water is not crystal clear, and there are not a million brilliantly colored fish to watch, but if there is a heaven, and I think there really may be one, it may be similar to snorkeling, dreamy, soft, bright, quiet. At first, my breath underwater sounded labored and congested, like the Coeur d'Alene character in 2001 when he's in the pod outside the mothership. I floated off by myself. Then in the silence, I felt for a while as if I were breathing along with everything in the world. It is such a nice break from real life not to have to weigh anything. Beautiful green plants swayed in the current. Funny little fish floated past. I daydreamed about Pammy. Near the end, she said of her young daughter, "All I have to do to get really depressed is to think about Rebecca, and all I have to do to get really joyful is to think about Rebecca." I floated around slowly, crying. The mask filled up with tears. I could have used a windshield wiper. I felt very lonely. I thought maybe I wouldn't feel so bad if I didn't have such big pieces of Pammy still inside me. But then I thought, I want those pieces in me for the rest of my life, whatever it costs me. So I floated along, still feeling lonely, but now not quite so adrift, because I started thinking of Pat, big and fat and brave enough to wear a swimsuit in front of us. I laughed, remembering what she'd said about the ladder, and I accidentally swallowed water. I watched a small fish swim in and out of the feathery sea plants, and I thought of beautiful, wild, happy Rebecca. This made my heart hurt too, yet I began to feel a little lighter inside. And just then, Tom came paddling over, and I became aware of his presence beside me, although I couldn't actually see his face. And for the longest time, we lay there bobbing on the water's surface, face down, lost in our own worlds, barely moving our fins, side by side. I wonder if anyone has any questions. Yeah.
I think that you're probably the single most self-disclosing author I've ever read. Which means that there are thousands of people out there who know, on one level know you quite well. I realize on another level they don't. Mm-hmm. But if it's possible, I'd like you to speak to how it feels to be in that position.
Feels great. I don't write about my really intimate stuff. I write about the stuff I'm comfortable writing about. So I do think we're as sick as our secrets, and I don't have a single good secret left. But you don't know very many of them. No one does. I'm very private, as I am with the people in my family. I try to protect their privacy so that I write about Sam and the places where we have great stories to pass along, but I don't, he has an intensely private life and relationship with people in history that is just between him and me and whoever he chooses to share that with. So I give myself that as an offering also, so that the stuff, I weigh 10 pounds more than I did a couple years ago. It's been interesting because I was always very thin, but I was bulimic until 10 years ago, and I was just, I was raised to think that you should be very thin and maybe a little thinner and then you'd be okay. So all of a sudden, I was like the two things that you're not supposed to do, which was a little older and 10 pounds heavier. It's like you agree not to do either of these. And they both happened. And it was so odd. And so when I first started writing for Salon again after I took this break, I wrote about having finally bought bigger underwear, you know, and having stopped pretending that I was ever going to fit into the old ones again, or thinking that that would be a good thing if I could. Because when I fit into the old ones, I was very thin, and it was a part of my way of being in the world, which had to do with a deprivation or an anxiety about it. And I thought, I don't know how long I'm going to live, but I don't think it's going to be long enough to obsess too much more about my butt, you know? So I bought these big underwear that fit. And they were really roomy and roomy in the R-O-O-M-Y sense, not the R-U-M, but probably also in the R-U-M-I sense. They're my roomy underwear. And so I just wrote about what a concept that is. To be a regular size, to be a little bigger, and to have underwear that fit instead of keeping the old underwear around with this promise that we'll fit into them again. And then people would say, God, I can't believe that you write about your underwear. I thought, my underwear aren't private. My underwear are clothing, you know, and they're nothing to me. You know, I wouldn't want you to see them, you know. And I especially wouldn't want you to see me in them. But I can write about them because there's a great story there, which is that I've had a moment of clarity, or a number. You know, a line of moments of clarity that have me choosing on the side of comfort now instead of deprivation and thinking that I need to be Drew Barrymore. I'm in my mid-40s. I have a 9-year-old child. I have a mother who's 75 who I help take care of. I am not going to be Drew Barrymore, and I never was Drew Barrymore. And until a relatively short time ago, I felt that it meant that I wasn't okay. And it's been such a recent, I mean, literally in the last 10 years, which is a quarter of my life, not even, that I've understood that I was okay, even though I looked the way I looked and was the way I was, that I thought underwear I can write about, you know. And so this is all by way of saying that the stuff I talk and write about publicly really doesn't feel like it's that intimate to me anymore. It's stuff I've either been talking about in smaller groups or for a long time or with friends, and it made them just hysterical with laughter. They would have tears streaming down their face, and I think, this is good, you know? And or else it would be stuff that we would have really great conversations about because they'd feel relieved that somebody was talking about it. So I was just talking where was I, sometime this week, I guess it was when I was in Atlanta, with some newspaper people about how much hipper it is to be an alcoholic and an addict than a bulimic. Because like a lot of your better people are alcoholics, they're sober alcoholics and drug addicts. You know, like a lot of the people musically I love most they're drunks and they're sober and they're great. But the bulimics are like, ugh, you know, Sherry Boone, who I happen to like, you know, it's Debbie's sister, but, and I like her. I happen to like Sherry Boone a lot, but she's like what is a famous person in the world of bulimia. So I wouldn't talk about it for a long time, and my therapist kept saying, are you ever going to write about this? You know, and this was like 6 or 7 years of being free of it. I said, I don't know, not yet. And I thought that the reason I wasn't writing about it was that my family was going to roll its collective eyes and go, oh, God, you know, every single thing she could have wrong with her, she has wrong with her. But the fact is that every single thing that they could have wrong with them, they have wrong with them, but they haven't gotten any help or healing around it, you know? And I realized that I was like laying this on my family because it's painful for me. And then all of a sudden, and I didn't have any plans to write about it or even to allude to it kind of cryptically. And then I was on my 10-year birthday, the anniversary of being free of it for 10 years, which was Valentine's Day of 1997. I was in front of a huge crowd in Berkeley. And I had thought if and when I do this, it'll be in a small situation. And I was at this big theater, and it was my birthday that when I announced it. You know, and of course everybody started singing happy birthday, and it was really great. And I thought, whoa. And then and I felt kind of ashamed of it because one does, because the shame is just so deep and so much a part of our DNA at some point. And it was so great. And then once I announced it, then I could write about it. But so bulimia is not intimate to me at all at this point. I mean, I talk about it till the cows come home. But there's a lot of stuff that I'm still slogging through. Faith, to me, there are aspects of it that I talk to 2 or 3 people about. And there are other aspects of it that I can just say, oh, yeah, this is something you'll find, or this I've noticed, or don't even bother with that. If you're anything like me, there's really no meat on those bones, but if you might, if you get lost, try this or try that, and so it's interesting because people do think that they know me, and because I've chosen to share myself, because I was the keeper of the family secrets, and I have probably erred on the other side of that, but I mostly keep the family secrets. I won't keep mine. I don't write a lot about my brothers. I wrote one piece about my mom in here, and it's been a disaster. Everyone in the family was mad at me for a long time because people would say, I didn't even know you had a mother, you know? And so, of course I had a mother. Everyone has a mother. But the point is I hadn't written about her because I had a complicated relationship. So I wrote about her in operating instructions, but it's like a PR piece. You know, it's a puff piece. So I was allowed to write about her if I made it a puff piece. But I'm not allowed to talk about what it's like to be a middle-aged daughter who's frustrated that her whole life she had a complicated, kind of screwed up relationship with her mother, and then finally is in middle age, and then her mother needs a mother, you know? And I finally wrote that piece, and one of my aunts called and said, what you've done is unforgivable. Like my aunt is the ethical consultant for God, you know? And it was awful, though. The whole family was mad at me, and then I thought, you know what? That's none of my business. My business is to tell the truth and to find my way and to become who I'm supposed to be and to stop being the keeper of the family secrets. And I kind of hinted to my aunt that she should be nicer because I had the goods on her, too.
You could talk about how writing fiction and writing nonfiction are different, like how the writing process or the state of mind.
He wanted me to talk about the writing fiction and writing nonfiction and any differences, how much they're alike and how much they're different. For me, nonfiction's a lot easier. Yeah, I always thought of myself as a novelist because I always loved novels most of all when I was a child, even from my earliest days. And I also always like true stories like Farley Mowat and stuff. I always loved animal stories. And but I really loved fiction. That was where I could really get lost. And I was a really shy, sensitive child, and I just found it really scary to even really be alive, you know. And I found it scary to be alive at home, let alone in school, you know. And this was when I was little, and of course it just got worse and worse. And then there was 7th and 8th grade, which some of us are just starting to get over. And I always loved fiction. I always loved when people created a whole world that I could enter into and get lost and then kind of come up for air every so often and find myself in the most unlikely, most absolutely diametrically different set of circumstances, find that unifying stuff of being human. But so I wrote my first 4 books were novels. I think that I'm not sure if I'm a novelist. I really don't know what I am, and I'm kind of refusing to sign on the dotted line right now when pressed. But I think I'm a storyteller. And I don't know what the form of that's going to be. I think I have a very good ear for good stories. And I have a good ear for dialogue. And I'm willing to write everything down. I usually, unless I say I always do, I always have a pen with me. I don't carry pencils because you can't write on yourself with a pencil. But you can write on yourself with pen if you need to. And I always have paper. I always do. I mean, now I've stolen notepads from the hotel, but I usually have index cards. And so I have a good ear and the willingness to go that extra mile and to jot things down as I hear them, as they come to me, as they appear, as I'm there to receive them in the express line or at the airport or here or wherever. Or I was on a phone interview. God, I got the best line from someone who called to interview me. It was a line from the Four Quartets where Eliot wrote, "All time is eternally present." Isn't that a great line? So I wrote that down. Now, see, a regular person might not have. They would have appreciated it but not written it down. Now, a regular person might have a better memory than I do, and I'm very absent-minded, and I was an absent-minded child, and everybody tried to get me to not be that way. And it's been about, since I started being a writer, that I understood that it wasn't the worst thing you could be. Like, mean was worse, but who mentioned this? Like, or how, cold, or with a shut down heart, or half dead, So, and then absent-minded was actually not hateful. It was just, it was not convenient all the time. So I write things down. So I'm an amasser of stories and details. It's like, and I wrote in Bird by Bird a lot about how it's like the rags for the rag bag, and that your unconscious is doing all of the good work in whatever, whether you're writing fiction or nonfiction, but you gotta be gathering rags for the rag bag of it. And you get your burlap and your velvet and your silk and your weaving and your bits of gold thread and your bits, and you don't try to figure out what you're gonna do with it. It's not like in your family when you bring something in and they make you declare what you're going to be using it for. Like, I don't make Sam declare what the stuff he's gathered for is for. I let him bring it in for a while. I give him some space. I give him a grace period. And he figures it out, or he figures out that he doesn't need it. So you do that. I do that with both kinds of work that I do. I find that with the kind of essays I write, and I write short pieces are just so much easier, partly because they are short. There's a beginning, a middle, and an end. It takes me a week to write a salon piece. It takes me many, many drafts. I am not a natural writer. That should give everyone hope. And then people say, oh, you talk just like you write, or you write just like you talk. But it takes me draft after draft to get it to come out at all naturally, But when I have a salon piece due, I can have an unbelievably bad first draft written in 2 days. And it'll be 10 pages, but the pieces are only supposed to be like 4 to 6. But I love the length of 4 to 6. It's a very good match for me. And it's funny because I think you grow up thinking that there are certain ways it should be done, and there are certain things that we can count more. Because we're Americans. And what we count is long and extended, and it should be done by yourself, and you shouldn't enjoy it too much. And then we can count it the most, And so if it's short, and it's like a Christmas tree bulb instead of a whole wall mural, by the old rules, it doesn't count by much, but I'm not convinced that by any real rules, it's not the same, especially if all time is the eternal present. So, and that's why they call it the present, because it's a gift. So, I find that a novel takes me 3 years. And for a year, I don't know what I'm doing, and I'm in the dark, and I'm really going on faith, and I'm really on the tightrope wire. And it takes a lot more stamina and isometric concentration. So the rewards are greater because the output is great and the concentration is great, and you bring your very best to it every time you sit down, and that's in and of itself the reward. But by the same token, I'll tell you, I love these short pieces. I don't write short stories as a problem, so I don't write short fiction well. It's just not my language. And so, but I don't think the process for me is terribly different. It takes me, with a novel, a whole draft to know who the people even are. I don't know a great deal when I start out, except that I'm willing to work with them. for a few years, that I think they're interesting enough, or I feel affectionately enough towards them that I can imagine putting in that kind of time, getting to know them and helping them really hone their stories. So, but the first drafts for me are just always dreadful, and all of my stuff kicks in, all of my fear that I'm not okay, that the jig is up, that the well is going to run dry or has, and you know, you just have to wear that out by getting the work done anyway. And then I tell you, when you have a really unbelievably bad first draft written, you're home free, and then it gets fun. So I started traveling and promoting the book, my Traveling Mercies, at the end of January, and Salon was running 6 excerpts from the book, so that brought me till, what's today, Wednesday, till tomorrow, the first original piece runs. And I know I can't write when I'm this tired and I can't think straight, and so I got like 3 awful first drafts written, and they were on my computer, and they made me feel so rich, because that's the coin of the creative realm, is bad drafts, you know, false starts, failures, things that don't work at all, messes, chaos, impossibility. And so last week I was home more days than I was gone. I was home Wednesday and Friday. That's 2. And I had an awful draft, and I was really looking forward to it. It was really fun. And it was, I guess I also know one thing now that I didn't know 6 months ago, that one of the most crucial things about writing is to have a little bit of leeway. Because the way I went to college, which is to say I didn't go for any length of time at all, but when I went, I started everything right before they were due, and I worked really hard and really frantically, and I used the exact amount of time that I had. And if I had an extra hour, I worked till the last second on it and handed it in. If I didn't have the extra hour, it was done an hour before that. And with these salon pieces, if I can be done Thursday in the early afternoon and not have to email it in until Friday, it gives me this unbelievable edge, because the material knows what it's about, what it looks like, how it wants me to get it told. It just knows, but it needs me to get my sticky fingers off of it so it can breathe a little bit, and so that I can go away. It's like when your kid won't stop nagging and nudging you to take him to the whatever, and you finally say, just go outside, will you? You know, and they go outside, then you like them again, and then you have all this energy to be useful. And I have been finding that if I can have half of a day, I will make small changes that are enormous in terms of how much better the piece will be. But in any real way, for me, the difference is not, it's not really very dramatic. There's something luxurious about being able to finish something and have someone to read it every couple of weeks instead of every few years. Yeah.
I need help understanding the relationship that exists between you and us, or between an author and an audience. I know maybe a quarter of the people in here, and we talk about you like you're one of us. You're part of our community. And I also know, having recently switched from just writing journal writing to purposely writing what I know I need to say for somebody else, that there's a relationship there that matters, but I don't understand it at all.
Well, I really, honestly, I'm not being coy. I'm not sure that I do either. I spend most of my time alone. Sam goes to school from about 8:30 till 3, and I won't eat dinner with people, except for Sam. Once a week I eat with our best friends. We go to a restaurant. They always want me over for dinner, and I won't do it. I really am a person who wants to be alone and is shy, like almost everybody here is, I'm sure, and yet at the same time, I can talk without any anxiety at all. I don't have a speck of anxiety right now, and I didn't when I got here. I was so relaxed, I left my suitcase at the hotel, and the media escort had to go back for it in the snow. That's how relaxed I was. There's a part of me that doesn't understand why you're all here, and I don't understand why I'm doing really well as a writer. There are at least half of the writers with books out this year are much better writers than I am, and a lot of the novelists are. I understand I have some kind of gift that has to do with being open, being pretty open-hearted, and obviously being in a, trying to come from a sweeter place instead of a cooler place, or trying to get you to have certain respectful feelings about me. I mean, I don't have that at all. I feel like, I don't know, I'm glad to be here, and I feel like I can, look and I'll kind of see someone's face, and I can feel a lot of love or some tenderness coming off of that person, and then I'm just sort of trying to pour myself back into it's like a big tide pool we're in right now, and your stuff is washing over me, and I believe my water washes back over, and it's just kind of this strange little phenomenon, and I literally don't even think about it. I don't look out here before I go on and think, why are they there? But this part doesn't feel artificial, because I love to go hear people whose work I like talk, and I love when people be really human and make me laugh, and I just want to be there, and I don't feel this great projection on them. It's like, I remember Ram Dass said this thing that I really loved a while ago. He said when he first started going over to India, I guess after he got kicked out of Harvard in the 60s, that when he kept coming back and kind of carrying the word about God and about the work people were doing with consciousness, that he thought people wanted him to get holier and holier and more together. And that it took him about 15 years to realize that people just wanted to get more and more human, because it was giving them permission to do the same and to get more real and more artistic and more devout and more sloppy and less concerned about who their relatives needed them to be or who they'd always agreed to be in order to keep the family going or to have the illusion that you were doing that. And then there's this weird there are these little branches of us that aren't in it for that, and we couldn't always answer what we're in it for, but we know not that. So I guess if I come to see a writer or a poet I really admire, it's because I find it exhilarating to watch people let me in for an hour here and an hour there. I find it really a trip. Yeah.
I actually had 3 questions. I couldn't decide which one, so I thought I'd let you choose.
Okay.
The 3 questions have 2 words each. The first question is Martha Stewart. The second question is Jerry Falwell. And the third question is Tinky Winky. I just kind of want to know.
Wow, aren't Tinky Winky and Jerry Falwell kind of the same question, though?
Actually, not really. You can
Gosh, wow. I just saw Martha Stewart for the first time the other day. I've seen her image on covers and stuff, and I've seen her, but I've never actually seen the show. And I guess this was, again, back when I was in Atlanta. I was channel surfing, and I saw Martha Stewart. And she was describing what you have to do to keep plants comfortable, mist-wise. And I thought, well, that's really nice. Like, why does everybody make fun of her all the time? And I thought, well, because she's kind of a fascist, and she's scary, and she is, and then you try to do what she's doing on her show. Somebody wrote me a letter when I was, wherever I was Monday, I don't even know. I think it was in Chicago. They said that they tried to make the Martha Stewart meringue swans. And if we live to be 80, we're not going to wish that our houses had been cleaner more often.